Representative Yvette Herrell, thanks for being on Crossroads.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, you're working on two big issues that I think are probably going to become two of the biggest issues in the country. Maybe not by choice of some of the American people, but energy security and also the weaponization or politicization of climate change.
Right.
And I think this go hand in hand.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, when you're sitting in Washington, D.C., watching this administration pretty much vilify our oil and gas industry, and really, when you look at our global standing and what this does for national security, it's unfortunate that we have somebody in the administration that actually campaigned on doing away with fossil fuels with no regard to what it looks like or what it does to the communities and to the country, but they're utilizing both climate change and energy, and they're trying to kind of tie those two together and make you believe that there is some irrelevance there, and there is not.
One thing I've been noticing, there's a common keyword that the Biden administration is using, and that's transition.
Yeah.
Biden calls this the extraordinary transition, right? They keep saying transition. They're even saying, some of them are saying, it's a crisis, never let a good crisis go to waste. What are they transitioning towards with this energy crisis?
Just more stupidity and bad policies. Because here's the thing, and this is what I try to remind people all the time. If this is really about climate, and I've heard the word climate change, I've heard, climate justice. I mean, you just can't believe it all the time. That's what we talk about in committees. But if it's really about climate and doing what is right, well, why aren't we then utilizing our environmental regulatory processes, utilizing those in other nations? Instead of producing oil and gas here, where we do it cleaner, more affordably, and better than anywhere else in the world, if it's about climate, then why would we be going to Saudi Arabia or other countries asking them to produce oil for us when they don't have those, the regulatory environment that we have? So right away it tells you, if we're going to be honest about this, it is not about climate, but it's a good talking point for them. And this transition, we're not going to transition. We don't have the infrastructure to transition as fast as they want to. But here's what I'll tell you. I look at, what happened in Europe a few years ago in the 70s. They tried to do something similar. They weren't ready for it. It didn't work. And now they have some of the highest utility costs in the world. They just aren't there yet. It's kind of like the cell phone. When it first came out, big, bulky, it didn't have good reception. Very few people could afford it. But as time went on, technology developed, competition got involved, free markets. Now we have telephones, everybody has one. But we had to wait for the technology and for the price and for the right time. They're not willing to do that with the energy sector.
Well, you hit on some really important points. One of the big ones being, why are we basically buying from other countries? And
right.
For that matter, why are we not holding China accountable when they're one of the worst polluters? And what a lot of people don't realize is coal energy, there's generations of coal power.
Right.
Earlier generations were very dirty and very messy. Stuff currently being used in China, for example, very messy. Newer stuff's actually very clean. And the same thing with a lot of energy sectors. There's newer technologies that are very clean. So why are we tossing out the whole thing rather than maybe building newer ones that are more efficient?
Exactly. And that's what I think the message isn't really getting out there. American energy is cleaner than the next 7 countries combined. I mean, when you think about that, and it isn't as if we've made our benchmark and we're stopping. Technology continues to evolve and work. These big companies and even the small ones, everybody wants clean energy. Everybody wants fresh air and clean water. So it's really unfortunate that we're going to vilify the most important industry, in my opinion, to this entire nation. I mean, it touches everything. What we're not talking about is the food shortages, the food crisis that we could be going towards just by virtue of crops weren't planted this year because of the cost of fuels and pesticides and fertilizers. And then, of course, with the market, volatility and what's happening in Ukraine. But, when you look at the big picture, this is food to, our farm to table. This is products to stores. This is supply chain issues. This is an energy crisis that affects every single American. And what we've watched this administration do is placate to Putin, placate to Communist China Party. I mean, think about it. We are selling off our strategic petroleum reserve that is there for the American people off to China. I mean, this is very frightening, and these are the conversations that we should be having with the American people, because we are placing ourselves, I believe, in a very vulnerable position.
Well, I think you're hitting on a deeper position or deeper picture of what energy is.
Right.
Because, for a lot of us, we talk about energy, it's like heating our homes, or maybe you have blackouts or brownouts, or maybe it costs more money to drive your car. But it's also food security. It's also transportation. It's fertilizer. It's global shipping. It's national
everything.
Security.
But you know what else it is? And this is I'm glad you just said that. Here's what people don't get. Energy, fossil fuels, petroleum products touch our everyday lives in the form of clothing, makeup, plastics, asphalt, glasses. I mean, equipment for medical supplies. I mean, there are so many. In fact, even when they were having the big debate about the vaccine last year, well, I told people, go get one if you want. But when you do, thank the oil and gas industry, because every one of those syringes is touched by a petroleum product, and actually some of the medications were too, or the vaccines were too. But here's what people don't realize: it isn't just the thermostat in the house or the starting the car. There are so many other products that we take advantage of every day, and I think that's sometimes kind of the missing link, where most people, and especially our younger generations, that don't realize how involved their regular day-to-day life is with the fossil fuel industry.
And that's a really big deal, too, because we start talking about inflation and rising costs. It's almost like you're taking a crisis that is already developing and making it worse through policies that restrict these industries. And this is where I think a lot of the climate activist people get stuck, because they think the only option is maybe wind turbines or solar panels. People argue, well, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Germany tried it, and frankly, they're reliant on Russian gas and oil, and they're really struggling right now.
Right.
People think that's not people think that that's an option. Is it an option? Like, where can we go if not this?
Well, here's the thing. I'm an all of the above energy person, but I'm also a realist, and the demands for energy are going to do nothing but increase. So why are we focusing on other countries who don't have the same protocols in place as we do, when we can produce energy here much cleaner and more affordably? But the thing of it is here's what I'm concerned about. And if we're going to be honest, and I said this in a committee hearing, if we're going to talk about renewables, then let's talk about everything from the development stage to the disposal stage, because these windmills that to me are just awful, and what they do to the landscapes are terrible. But how are we going to dispose of those blades that have a 20 to 25 year lifespan? Why isn't anybody crying out about the birds and the birds of prey and the eagles that are being killed by these wind turbines? How do we dispose of these, these solar panels and other things? We're creating, we think we're fixing one problem, and we're creating 15 more that no one's even talking about. But the thing that I think most Americans depend on is reliable energy. They want to be able to flip the light switch. They want to be able to go to the store and have choices. You can't have that. It's not there yet when you look at green energy. You have to have fossil fuels.
Now, I know when it comes to climate change, there's a lot of arguments around this. It used to be called global cooling, that it was global warming, now it's climate change. A lot of people point out that the data, it's the science agrees because they have a gun to the head of the scientists, essentially, right. So they can't disagree with it. They're not allowed to disagree with it. A lot of conservatives point that out. But, leaving that debate aside, one of the big problems people have with climate change is how it's being used politically.
Yeah.
And they're seeing this as being kind of the Trojan horse or the vehicle for a lot of things that we'd say are not climate related.
Correct.
And the categories and definitions of what falls under, regulating carbon are becoming broader and broader and broader. And it has a lot of people very concerned about it.
Yeah, and to take it one step further, and this is why so many of their arguments, they've got the mainstream media really driving the narrative, and then you have people like Cori Bush or AOC that sit on committees that can tweet something out and everybody in the country believes it. But here's what they're not telling you, and this is why it is so frustrating. For instance, we introduced a bill, a Wildfire Mitigation Act, which would have streamlined the NEPA process. So it would have given us an opportunity to get in and do forest management. I can't even get a Democrat to say, you know what, that's a great idea. This would save our watersheds. It would clean up the forest floor. But it would also save on these catastrophic wildfires we're seeing everywhere. Now, think about the emissions from those fires going into the atmosphere. Nobody's even talking about, where's our environmentalists, our climate gurus, the climate czars there? It doesn't fit their narrative. So they're very good at just sounding the alarm on certain, words, these trigger words, but they actually don't follow through with any real meaningful conversation. And, if we're going to be honest with the American people, then let's have the honest conversation about how we can, how about we look at ways that we can implement more of this green energy into our energy resources, but we can't just pull the plug on fossil fuels and think somehow the American people are going to go for it, especially when they realize how much they rely on fossil fuels for their day-to-day lives.
Well, and what you hit on, I think, is something a lot of people, not even just Americans, but Australians, people in other countries who are dealing with, ironically, the same types of policies.
Yeah.
Look at the wildfires there and the wildfires in California. It's same thing, some of the same causes, really, like these politics restricting the forestry management and the ability to clean out underbrush and things that cause these things.
Yeah.
People are watching this and they're saying, why is this policy being blocked if they actually care about the environment?
Right.
And they can stop the building of like major things that the country needs, for example, because there's like an endangered insect, and then they don't mind if that insect gets killed by the poorly managed forest fires or something.
Exactly. They're weaponizing it. They're utilizing the Endangered Species Act or the NEPA process, all these things. They're weaponizing them against, and the environmentalists and the special interest groups are the ones winning the war right now when it comes to American energy. And that's why I think it's so vital that we're talking about this very honestly, because you hit it. They will slow down every kind of project you can imagine that's beneficial to creating jobs, to our economy, to our environment, and yet nobody says anything, because what they'll do is they just use little trigger words like, we've got to save the, shell mussel out in the middle of the desert, or the minnow, or whatever. Look, everybody wants to make sure we live in a good world, a clean world, and an environment that takes care of our animals and everything. But to the point when we're going to put predatory animals, or, one state you can hunt the sage grouse, in other states it's an endangered species. But they're going to choke off industry that is so important to us. And at some point in time, it has to be people over policy and people over politics, more importantly.
Now, I guess just last question. We talked about how this is basically being weaponized, how things that work are being blocked, cleaner technologies are being blocked, and this is all being done under the narrative that somehow this is leading towards something better.
Yeah.
What is the agenda with this? It seems it's not really about the environment, is what a lot of people I think are seeing, including myself. What's it really about?
Yeah, I truly feel like, after being in Washington for the last 18 months, at first I thought it was just almost a mistake. Then I thought, well, they've got to have a better idea. And now just watching what they're doing, it feels as though we are watching an administration and progressives that are trying to dismantle our nation, and we are weakening ourselves. And I can't believe that some of these people truly believe in these policies that they're pushing, and they've made very sure, when we're seeing these blackouts, these brownouts, in New York and other states, upper class people aren't seeing them, but lower class, those that are marginalized, those are the folks that are really being hit with these higher costs. All the people they're trying to help are the ones that are having the worst time of this. But you have to wonder, is it that they hate President Trump so much that they're undermining everything he ever did that was helpful for America? Or do they just hate America so much that they're willing to put us into a position of government reliance? I feel like we're building government up and making it bigger instead of shrinking government and really getting back to basics, the Constitution, federalism. It's a very frightening place, and I think this is the conversation that we're starting to see around the kitchen table, because I think Americans are going, wait a minute, we want our country back. We want to be in a safe neighborhood. We want to be prosperous and make sure our kids have something to inherit from us as a nation. And right now, it is scary to think what they're doing to the bedrock of this nation.
Hey, Representative Yvette Herrell, thanks for being on Crossroads.
Thanks for having me.